Okay, good evening. Okay, good evening, everybody. We still can say Happy Purim, being that tonight is Shushan Purim, but today was Shushan Purim. As the Megillah relates in the story of Purim, that Purim was established on the 14th of Adar, which was yesterday, in all the cities of Achashverosh's kingdom, but in the cities like Shushan, which were cities surrounded by walled cities, the celebration was instituted on the 15th of the month of Adar, which is today. So, for instance, like a city like Jerusalem, old city of Jerusalem, which is a walled city, and some say it extends outside of it as well, but all within that vicinity, anyone that can see the walled city even, they actually celebrate Purim today, and concluding tonight. There's actually a phenomenon called a Purim Mishulosh, when Purim is on a Friday, so especially in Jerusalem and Israel in general. So there's Friday, is the 14th is the celebration, Shabbos, and Sunday. And those that have been there know it's an extraordinary 3 days. So, in a sense, we're still in the echo effect of Purim right now. So those of you here last night, at least I speak for myself, were uplifted somewhat in a warm environment. So I thought it's appropriate to address the theme of Purim in our own personal psychological lives. And there are many themes, of course, but primarily Purim is known for its joy, unbridled, uncensored joy. And therefore, the class is on the topic of perpetual joy, how to carry over, the Purim spirit into our lives. Because it's one thing to be inspired, and it's another thing to maintain the inspiration. Maintenance contracts are always more important than initial contracts. There was a guy I know, a rabbi, who trying to deal with the epidemic of single life in Manhattan. I don't know if we call it an epidemic, but some people call it an epidemic. So he established one among the many so-called shadchanis services, matchmaking, introducing people to each other. And then after a while he told me that he had to stop because he realized that the main challenge was the maintenance contract, not just getting them together to keep it going. So I suggested to him, why don't you do it for a flat fee? Like, to get two people together, if you get married, $1,000, and if you stay married for 10 years, another, $5,000. But he declined. He chose not to do that because he realized the maintenance contract in that sense is not going to be a simple process because you have to get immersed in the whole marital therapy department. But on a more serious note, so inspiration, even though some people find it difficult to get inspired, but I can tell you, relatively speaking, inspiration is far easier than maintaining it. And I'm sure no one here is immune from the phenomenon of being inspired one moment or one evening or some magical moment in your life, and then suddenly it dissipates to the point that you can't even remember that it was there. That people fall in love. And at the time when someone falls in love, you can't even imagine being separated from the person you love. And then a little while later, these two people not only can't They can't, not only do that, and they're not with each other, they can't stand being near each other. And you have to start wondering that, is there something the matter with us? That we get turned on suddenly, something touches us, and whatever it may be, whether it's romantic, whether it's spiritual, whether it's other feelings that we all, from time to time, wake us up. And then it disappears, as if it wasn't there. And you say to yourself, so which is real? The real you? Was it the one that was inspired, or was it the one that is now uninspired? Anyone here that has not had some type of dissonance of this nature? Does that mean that everyone has had it, right? So I should ask. As a good lawyer, you would tell me I have to now ask if everyone's had it, then we know for sure, right? Then we have to also add into the equation those that are not willing to share. And I'm not putting anyone on the spot here. Just know we're all in the same boat. So in case you feel that you're unique with this inspiration and maintenance thing, you may be unique, but that's not what makes you unique. We're all in that situation. So just let me, a little hot tea for a moment. This is not from any alcohol intake or Purim after effects. I just simply have some bronchial issues, let's put it that way. So, this question, and I should add as a footnote, I always tell this to people, it's an interesting thing. All of us searching for healing or growth or trying to fix something that is not working in our lives. And I at some point observed, it was years ago, but now it became like to me, I see it all the time, that people get so invested in some of their own shortcomings and weaknesses that they convince themselves that that's their unique identity. In other words, it's basically a psychological trap where you begin to think you're unique in your suffering. You're unique in the things you haven't done. And in a sense, if someone takes away those negative things, you'll lose your uniqueness. And then I read, not now, years ago, that there is especially people who've gone through serious traumatic experiences, childhood experiences, where they were hurt. They begin to expect to be hurt, and to the point when they're not being hurt, they don't feel natural. So when someone loves them or cares about them, they're expecting the second shoe to fall, and they get a slap. To the point that it was documented, people who've grown up in homes that were very erratic, unpredictable, alcoholic parent, who one day loved you and the next day was violent, or the third day would disappeared, or any other such type of severe erratic behavior in a childhood's experience, where a child doesn't yet have the defenses built up to know how to compensate or to make sense of it all. So children like that will grow. I'm using an extreme example because subtly we all have it sometimes. A child like that will grow up expecting that when there's love, the next day there has to be hate or violence. As I said, it's been documented of adults, full-grown adults, who fell in love with someone, and a healthy love. And when that person reached to them, that person would recoil, expecting to be slapped. Now, most of us, if I reached to you, would not react that way. I'm not talking about a violent reach. Just why would a person react like recoil? Because that's what they've got used to. Their defense mechanisms are so acute because that's what they were used to. And then what happens is you develop almost a secondary identity. Not almost, actual secondary identity. That secondary identity becomes who you think you are. And a very big part of it is all your weaknesses, your insecurities, your fears. What changes the tide for people who are in that situation is often one of the powerful things of the 12 steps, the powerful thing of collective sharing. Not even with a professional, when you hear that other people have your story, the first thing is almost like disbelief and shock. It's like your story is my story. And then you come to realize after a while that just like, God forbid, when you're cut, all of us are going to have the same reaction. I mean, talking about normal immune system. It's going to bleed, then it will clot, then it will coagulate, and then it will heal. And it will take a week or 3 days or whatever it is. And you realize, all of us, it's not unique to me, that's what happens. Psychologically, it's the same thing. Certain pains, certain deficiencies, certain losses or scars in our lives, the human immune system, the soul, and the psyche react a certain way. And in that we are all equal. But you've lived so many years thinking that you're unique in that because your suffering was unique to you. And it may have been, but not necessarily the reaction. And it's extremely freeing to find out that there are thousands, if not millions, of other people exactly in the same situation. Not that they suffered the same way, but the reactions and that developing of a whole new way of looking at yourself. And almost being proud that your uniqueness lies in your weaknesses. So I always tell people, first thing I said, you're not unique in your weaknesses. I've seen many like you. And I see sometimes people are insulted almost. I say, you're unique in your strengths, not your weaknesses. And when you learn to figure that out, that's when you'll grow. It's interesting, because who would like to feel I'm unique in my weaknesses? But that's what happens when they're sustained, or there's even a distorted perception, self-perception. And we develop layers of mechanisms that are a result of a vulnerable child who was hurt and had no choice but to protect himself or herself. So, with that being said, that was, I guess a footnote, but I was not such a footnote, it's actually relevant to our discussion, that even if it's not in such an extreme way as I just described, but subtly we all have elements of this. We have all elements of this. So this issue of being inspired, one moment, and then a moment later, or a day later, it dissipates, is not unique. And actually when Hasidim and spiritual seekers would go to their mentors, their spiritual masters, and this was one of the common questions, challenges, dilemmas. That here I am, I get inspired, whether it's in prayer or meditation or in other areas, and then I go back to work, and it's as if it never was there. So what's the matter with me? And you start feeling, not a question of hypocrisy, it's a question of dissonance. Which one is it? And the answer was always given, that they're both true. If you're inspired, it's a real experience. But then, when you lose the inspiration, it's not because the experience wasn't real, it's because there are other forces at work. So it forces us to really look at reality in a different fashion. And put it in summarized form, it goes like this. That existence, all of existence, including our own, consists of many layers. So, many of those layers remain hidden and concealed. We may call it the subconscious, the unconscious, the sub-subconscious, sub-sub-subconscious. No one even knows how deep it goes. No one knows. No one's ever been there and came back to tell us about it. But we definitely know that there are forces at work that you can't see. Within your soul, within your psyche, within your memory. Like none of us remember the first year of our lives. Even though I've said that here, sometimes people tell me they do remember. But it's not that common. And I don't even know if they really remember or they think they remember. I apologize for this. It's not... On the outer level, I have some obstruction. On the inner level, I'm doing all right. Okay. So there are many layers. Many of those layers, the hidden dimensions, will remain concealed sometimes our entire lifetime. For instance, let's talk about our potential, talent. Does anyone here know their potential talents? You know some of them. You know those few that have emerged in your life. Some of them actually, most of them usually emerge, if you can call it that, accidentally. You're a teenager, you go to camp, something happens, a project comes up, no one else to do it, suddenly it drops on you and you realize, hey, I can do this, I like doing this. How do you figure out what your skills are, your talents are? I know for myself, school sure didn't do it for me. If anything, it stunted some of my creativity. So yes, if you're lucky and blessed to have healthy parents, or parent, or a mentor, which can change your whole life, and someone was aware or sensitive to something, strength that you had, and they helped nurture it, that, of course, is a great blessing, because they help you understand and then bring it forth. But it's usually not the case, and even then it's one thing, two things. So most of our potential emerges, as I said, either circumstantially. You happen to travel somewhere, you meet someone, the opportunity comes, you suddenly realize you can do it. Another way is through crisis. Crisis always brings out strengths to overcome the challenge. Your challenge, competitiveness, anything like that. And so you pushes you to excel, and suddenly you realize you have strengths you didn't know you had. But that same mystery tells you that how many things are we aware of, are we not aware of, even as we sit here right now. With all our self-awareness, it could be 1%, 5%, no one even knows. Because as I said, nobody's been there. So they can't tell you like what it looks like, the whole picture. When you study Kabbalah and Hasidic thought, it actually does give you a snapshot of what the soul looks like. That's one of the most powerful reasons to study this material. It's like giving you an X-ray of what you really look like. And okay, so a skeptic can say, well, how do we know that? So I'm not here to prove it. I can tell you this. It resonates. If you see, or you read, and I speak from my own personal experience, suddenly you read a depiction, a description of what you are capable of. And then you apply some of the methods, and it works. How could you argue with that success? It's called experiential proof, experience. So let's just say even if you're a skeptic and someone tells you, here, this and this is your potential. You have within your psyche, within your soul, embedded certain strengths. And if you do A, B, C, D, those strengths will emerge. So even if you're a skeptic, might as well try it. What do you have to lose? And you try it and you see it worked. Firstly, you recognize that it exists within you. And secondly, you're accessing it. There's no stronger proof than that, because that's like, so you could then wonder, how did that book know it? So fine, you can spend the rest of your life trying to figure out how. But if it works, it works. Which is really why we ultimately study Torah in the first place. Why Jews from the beginning of time, history, were so dedicated to studying the book. Because they didn't see it as a book, as another piece of literature, or an academic exercise. They saw it as a blueprint of life. They saw it as a true blueprint of the psyche and the soul. And they saw it, the proof in the pudding. It wasn't just someone told it to them. They saw it work. And Abraham discovered it in his way, and different spiritual and mystical travelers discovered it in different ways. And they came back to tell us about it. So yes, you can go in with a skeptical eye and say, let me see it for myself, by all means. But you have to also, healthy skepticism means you're not just looking to justify your preconceived position, but if you do discover, you're ready to listen. And it's not just a one-way street, meaning you're sure it's wrong. And when you see the collective wisdom of ages, and you see it reflecting in our own soul, that itself is magical, because it's like a transportation, it's a transcendence of time and space. That people who lived in a completely different time, different period, different part of the geography, didn't have any of the technologies and comforts of our time. But the challenges of the soul, they had just like we have, and they dealt with it. That's wisdom you don't want to ignore. Yes, so people cried 3,000, 5,000 years ago too. And people laughed. And when they got cut, they bled the same way. And when their hearts were hurt, and their souls were pained, they had also anxiety. And when they experienced joy, they experienced it like we do. So if you think about it, the fundamentals don't even change. So with this whole uncertainty and fear around our economy, the changes, 21st century, let me tell you something. The main things don't change. Nothing changes. Everything else is basically ribbons and acronyms. I'm not suggesting we're not living in a real world. We live in a real world. We have to pay your bills. Obviously, that's a factor. But the foundations, the pillars, if you know what they are things that do not change with time and with history. They change how we access them. Some would even argue that prosperity and comforts actually tend to obscure some of these inner spiritual strengths, because you get so addicted to your gadgets and to your material comforts that you think that's going to provide you security. Until, God forbid, we are rudely awakened that anything material can never provide security, because it itself is temporary. Temporary foundations will give you that security, a temporary security, which, as we know, is not security at all. So, to go back to what I was discussing, layers. So there are many layers. There's the inner dimensions. In the Kabbalistic model, it's actually 4 general inner dimensions that exist. And then there's the outer layer, what we call the tip of the iceberg, surface. The surface of existence, which we see and hear and smell and taste and touch. Basically, the sensory experiences that we interact with on a daily basis. So you look around this room, you see tables and chairs and sofas and people, some cameras, and Jeff's cookies, and my tea. It's very good tea, by the way. Homemade brew. So we see all these externals, and you don't need to be a rocket scientist today to know that if someone said to you, so is this the whole picture? Is this reality? Let's say you're the guide to a Martian that lands on Earth, on 6th Street, and when you were the first one to open up the spaceship, and he or she or it or whatever comes out and says, introduce me to your world, to your reality. So, okay, here's a room. So the first description is what we see with our eyes, what we experience with our senses. And if the Martian or whatever, the little green man asks you, so what else is that? Is that it? So they say, no. We know today that all these items in this room are made up of smaller pieces. And they're called molecules. And in the chemical tables, it's chemical structures and biological structures. And within the molecules are made up of even smaller particles, atoms, which in turn are made up of subatomic particles. And how many layers more are there? You could say that's how much we've discovered. And there may be endless amount of layers. So why is it that we don't see it? The answer is because our eyes have limited tools, and we only can see or hear that which these tools can capture, contain. Just like when you take a picture of someone, you're not necessarily going to capture all their mood and their feelings within. Actually, some good photographers can capture that too, even if you want to fake it. I've seen that. But there's a certain external picture that we can create that conceals everything within. I don't know, I don't remember who it was. It was 20th century, in the 20s and 30s, a physicist, philosopher, who was challenged, as then the big challenge then to quantum mechanics, was when they discovered these bizarre results that were replicated again and again, completely counterintuitive. Whether it's Heisenberg's uncertainty principle or other bizarre realities in that subatomic world, Even Einstein, the great Einstein, refused to acknowledge it till the last day with a statement that God doesn't play dice and all that. So people ask this physicist, how do you guys come to all these type of weird conclusions when no one has ever seen atoms and let alone subatomic particles? So he gave a beautiful analogy of a fisherman who spread his net across the 7 seas and gathered and captured all these different types of fish that swim these seas. And he began documenting the different colors and different shapes and sizes and species. I mean, it's a metaphor. And then, after years of research, he came to the conclusion, this was his big thesis, his big scientific conclusion, that there are no fish in the sea that are shorter than a half-inch long. It's a revelation. And then, of course, a little child came to him and said, well, let me see the net. He sees the net, and the net is made up of ropes that are spaced a half-inch wide and long. So what does that mean, of course? That all the fish that were shorter than a half-inch long fell back into the sea. So was his conclusion right or wrong? Yeah, he should have just said one thing. If you use a net that has spaces of a half-inch, you're not going to capture any fish that are half-inch or shorter. In other words, his conclusion was right, but his tool was limited. And that's what the physicist said. If you're going to use your naked eyes, excuse me, or even a microscope, to try to see things that are not containable by these limited tools, instruments, it's like this. It's like the net. So therefore, these layers have to be measured in different ways. You cannot use your physical eyes to try to look for molecules. You need other tools. And there are other tools. And then there are dimensions that you need to extrapolate. You can't even ever see it directly. You can only see it indirectly. A favorite analogy I use for this, psychologically speaking. If, just here's a hypothetical hypothesis. You have a imaginary wall. A wall. But the wall is shrouded in darkness. You can't see what it looks like. What it's made of, its shape, its size, and also whether it's a level, a flat wall or a jagged one. And you don't have the ability to go over to the wall and touch it, nor shine a light on it. Is there any way for you to figure out what kind of wall it is? So initially you think it's impossible. The wall shrouded in darkness. I'm standing here. I can't shine a light. I can't touch it. How will you ever know? For all you know, it's a wall that's about to collapse. It can be a completely jagged wall, completely flat wall. The answer is you could figure it out. This is what's called the scientific method of extrapolation as opposed to interpolation. You can't find something directly. You have to find it indirectly. What do? You take a ball and you bounce it on the wall. So you can't go over and you can't touch it, but the ball will come back to you. And you'll see, if it bounces back straight, you know that part of the wall must be straight. If it comes back to the right, you know that wall must be indented to the left. If it comes back left, you know the wall. And you keep bouncing as many times as you like. You bounce enough times, you can never say, I saw the wall in that direct way, but you could say through extrapolation, here's my closest estimate. And it's a scientific estimate. It's not just some guess. Wild guess. It's based on true observation and testing. So when you go to a good therapist or a good soul doctor, rabbis were meant to be soul doctors, by the way. True rabbis, like Moses. They lost their way some in history. So if you go to a true soul doctor, the soul doctor is not necessarily sees your soul like we see it with the eyes, but he or she is sensitive to what a soul is like. And there's a way of bouncing a ball, figuratively speaking. How do you bounce the ball? Through certain questions, through certain challenges. Just like a doctor touches you to see if there's pain, and suddenly you yell out, so we know there's a sensitive part here. You go here, so that means there's something going on there. The same things when you speak to someone, and you go to a certain area that's very uncomfortable and very raw and tender, that person will resist going there. They'll say, no, that's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. The more the person resists, the more you know that wall got to be. Now, a good therapist doesn't just force their way in. You don't want to assault somebody's psyche because it's not respectful, also even dangerous. And above all, that too, that a person has resistance has to also be respected because that too is part of the growing process. Just because a person is sensitive in an area doesn't mean you have to attack it. You have to know how to do so. So when you're really talking to someone who has an understanding of the inner psyche of a person, a soul, that person sensitively broaches subjects that may seem to you innocuous and like meaningless almost. But it's like bouncing a ball on an invisible wall that we all cannot see, the wall of the unconscious, and trying to see the response. So your responses, no matter how calculated they are, for someone who understands that part, will understand and extrapolate certain things. I don't necessarily mean conclusive. Life is much more complicated than just a wall. But at least you start getting a sense of the different resistance we have, our strengths, our weaknesses. And you can really get a close to an accurate picture of a person's inner strengths, inner challenges, if you wish. All of that. So this process is obviously very fascinating because it's all about ourselves. Can you do it with yourself? Can you bounce the ball on your own wall? A little difficult, because you're not going to bounce it where you're supposed to be bouncing. That's problem number one. Problem number two, the lack of objectivity. So it's a little difficult. But when there's trust and there's a little help of a friend, someone you can speak to, they can help bounce the ball a little. And ultimately, it's going to be you who knows, because you're going to react. And sometimes reaction may be denial, sometimes anger, sometimes, as I said, absolute resistance. And then that's where I don't say the fun starts. That's when it gets complicated. That makes us complex individuals with issues. So basically, what I'm saying here is that there are layers. And actually, in the Kabbalistic map of things, these layers are very detailed, the structure is very defined and very indefinite details. That doesn't mean the structure as we are today, but the structure that we began with. Because as our souls came into this world, it too went through these layers, and then it manifested on the outer level, where sensory experiences become the most dominant ones. 99% of the day, you're busy with your sensory experiences. Things that stimulate you, the things you see, the things you avoid. The whole sensory tool chest that we use. So to go back to that question, here a moment you can be joy or inspired, and then a little while later it dissipates. The answer is, the inspiration came from a part of you that was touched, very real, but then you went back to the outer level layers of your life. And here, that part that was touched, so-called retreats back into its place, and now you have to contend with the realities on the ground. So, often, for example, Shabbos is meant to be, again, another best-kept secret lost for many of us. It was meant to be a spiritual day of traveling into your soul. Instead, it became a day for some to eat shalom, for others to socialize. And Shabbos has many different dimensions. Many people see Shabbos almost as a weird day. Like more than one person has told me, it's a strange day. It's a day you do nothing. I grew up in a house. We did nothing Shabbos. You don't go shopping. You don't go to shows. You don't spend money. You don't travel. We did nothing. And it struck me, yeah. Because they kept only half of Shabbos, which was what you don't do. Obviously, who's going to stick around keeping a Shabbos? You don't do anything all day. And not given temptation to turn on television at least to get some stimulation. But they miss the main story, which is, it's not a day when you do nothing. It's on the contrary. We try to minimize our material and sensory stimulation so that the soul can have a full day. So instead of it being you being swamped and overwhelmed by the 6 days of the week with all its responsibilities and obligations and challenges and corruption and all that wears us down, you have one day you travel inward, but to do so, to travel inward, there's a price. You have to shut down some of the outer noises. You can't travel inward while you're in the middle of the rush hour. You can't hear music that's subtle and beautiful if you're being drowned out by all the noises of life around us. So that part of Shabbos was forgotten. So it became this day of this stringent rules. As I've heard from many, my grandfather would go crazy if I went out to play. It became all this negativity that we don't do this and we don't do that. And then when you ask, so what do we do? So either they didn't know, or you didn't stay around to hear the answer. Which is true for I would say, all of Judaism, that half of it remained, which is the dogma, the rules, even the guilt, the judgment, and that whole spiritual dimension experience, which is really what it was meant to be like, is completely lost. To me, there's no question that is the root of most assimilation. Obviously, there's many secondary and third bounces and so on, but that's what it comes down to. And this is I'm not blaming anyone. It's just a collective challenge, and for all of us, not just for those that are so-called non-observant, but even for the observant. Because there's a concept called doing things mechanically. Mechanical Jews. Robotic Jews. Mitzvahs anoshim ulamada. So you can do all the mitzvahs because you grew up with it. Doesn't mean it touches you. As a matter of fact, you could even have two worlds. You do it for everyone else to see that you're like in the club. And internally you have a whole different life. And there's plenty like that too. And some people can't deal with that, so they just break away and even their external change as well. But the point is the dichotomy is huge. You will not find many, very few, that have a true fusion between their spirituality and their ritual. You find people with ritual and very little soul. You find people with soul with very little ritual. Because that's not an art that is easily mastered and has been forgotten, unfortunately. I mean people, extremely spiritual people, but they don't have any clue about what Judaism asks of them. And then the opposite is true. People who dress the part, and you think they're so-called ultra-Orthodox, so you think, well, these must be the most spiritual people on the planet. So, I don't want to hurt anybody, disturb anybody's, burst anyone's bubbles, but it's not necessarily the case. To me, it's like disturbing when I heard in the news today, so-called rabbi convicted of molestation. To me, rabbi and molestation is impossible to go together. Why don't they say that it was exposed that he's not really a rabbi? What makes a person a rabbi? If he's a molester, what are the credentials of a rabbi? But today it's easily said, he's a rabbi, I'm supposed to be a molester. Not my definition of a rabbi. Forget about ethical. So that just shows you that the word rabbi means nothing. It's just like a title. You know, there's some people, doctors, reverends, rabbis. People got their titles. But to get back to the theme here, a little political commentary. And time to time I have to vent my anti-religious sentiments. But as I always say, my best friends are Orthodox, so please. I'm not anti-Semitic. Do I look anti-Semitic? One second. So, in the teachings of mysticism, it actually describes a full comprehensive map of what it looks like in the inside world, that which we cannot see with the eye. In other words, what your soul looks like, and its dimensions. So think of it, as I said before, so when things happen to us in life, we have like a moment of truth, as I said, inspiration. It's a very true moment. A part of you, deep inside, resonated with something. Do not invalidate that. But also don't delude yourself into thinking just because you were touched, you exist there. You have other layers of your existence that take over. And this is also an art. How do you know where you really are? Sometimes things happen to us and we're sure that this is the place we belong. Then life takes over and you go back to where you began. Square one. The answer is both are true. So a great experience should be valued and should be cherished. And the challenge is, how do you open a channel from that inner experience, that moment, into the rest of your life? So just say to yourself, I'm there because I had the experience. It's not the case. It doesn't work that way. I'll just give you an example. One of my claims to fame, what I did earlier part of my career, so to speak, was, as some of you may know, from my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, before I wrote the book, my job was to absorb. I was an absorber, if you could call that. You want to know what that is, right? No, I wasn't like a walking paper towel. That's not what I mean. My work was to remember and retain hours and hours of the complicated and intricate talks of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I write about it in my introduction to Toward a Meaningful Life, the process. And many people are very intrigued because it's a very rare thing you find today. Someone can remember hours and hours of lectures without using tape recorders and no notes. And it's true. We don't, if you're able to take notes and take a tape recorder, why would you even use your mind that way? But because of the Shabbat and the holidays, we didn't use these devices. So we had to use our good minds, which is really, if you think about it, the tradition of Jewish history, Torah Sheba'al Peh. The oral Torah meant that it was a Torah that was memorized. I can tell you it changed my whole life having to do this because it made me tax my mind in ways I would never have done. It's not just doing it once. Do it in a sustained way for 15 years, 16 years. It changes how you think. It changes your ability to listen. You learn a lot of things about your mind that you would never know. I'll share one of the things. You ever have a situation, for instance, where you hear someone speak, and you like what they're saying. An idea resonates, it's an insight, it answers questions you may have had, something that's relevant. And like you say to yourself, I'm never going to forget this. And I can't wait to share it with my friends who I want to discuss this with or whatever. You can't wait till, let's say, the class or lecture ends, or the next day you get to work and you're waiting to tell someone. They say, okay, let me hear. They say, it was unbelievable. So share something. And you open your mouth and like almost nothing comes out. A word here, a word there. Like you say to yourself, what happened? Yesterday it was so clear to me. I got my questions answered. And now, like, I don't have words. I'm sure it's happened to some of you. It's happened to all. It happened to me many times. So what is this exactly? It's very similar to what I said before, an inspiration coming and going. What you heard when you heard the person speak, what made sense to you was not your mind working, it was that speaker's mind working. So God made our ears travel faster than our brains. So you can hear ideas that you have not yet processed. With the goal, of course, for you to process it afterwards. The delusion that we have is that you think because it made sense while you heard it, while your ears were entering your ears, that you actually integrate it and now you can just share it with someone. It doesn't work that way. You now have to take what you heard and you have to process it, which takes time. Either write it down, notes, reviewing. And you'll almost get to a point of confusion and forgetting everything that you heard. And then something emerges. And then what they call, you own it. You begin to own the idea. You cannot own an idea just because you heard it once. And that's what happens. What happens is you heard it, and you did understand it. But you didn't understand you understood the teacher understood it. So you thought you're the teacher for the moment. And later, when you try to repeat it, now you're on your own. So you don't have the words. If you took notes, or you struggled with it, and went back and tried to recreate it, struggle with it, then you begin to own it. So, the point being is that there are many experiences in our lives that will happen to us every day that touch parts of you That doesn't mean, however, that you are existing on those levels. It means that there are openings. So the challenge of perpetuating joy into our lives, the challenge of perpetuating any positive force, as I said, the maintenance of it requires the sensitive work of creating channels between our inner dimensions that have been touched here and there, channels that allow it to be sustained, allow it to be called up at will, not just when you're lucky and you have an epiphany or some type of moment of revelation. And that is much more complicated. I know for myself as a writer, as a teacher, communicator, it's one thing saying something that resonates with people. It's far harder to teach people how to build the tools, the mechanics, and the channels that they can build it in their own lives. So there are teachers who teach you brilliant stuff, but it ends there. And then there's teaching methodology, where you teach people the methods. So even when they're not in the presence of their teacher, they can grow with it. And one day they will be able to teach it to others as well. That is perpetual. Because if you can teach the method to someone, they can then teach it to someone else. If you don't teach them the method or the formula, then you just taught them a solution. But then what happens when there's a different problem and they don't have that solution? They need a different solution. That's why the necessity for the method. And this, in truth, is the way I would interpret what the whole body of and volumes of Torah scholarship is about. Yes, there's a lot of academic stuff and legal nuances and details. But above all, it's a blueprint that teaches us methodology, not just facts. So our challenge is twofold. First, how do we see the spirituality within the message? And secondly, how do we see it as a methodology? So Purim is a day, as I mentioned, is a day of joy. And I discussed this a few weeks ago when we started the month of Adar, which is the general month of happiness, of joy. About how is joy, and I've been writing about it as well in my weekly column, which I invite those of you that do not get it. If you leave your email, I'll be happy to send it to you. About, is joy or happiness hardwired into our systems? Or are some people just born with sad genes, so to speak? So last week, after a column I wrote about 2 weeks ago, a woman wrote to me from her own experiences and her children and people she's seen, that there are people who have a chronic tendency, at least, to not be happy, to be sad. We're not talking about due to a negative experience. We're talking about innate, inborn. And then what about people who suffer from chronic depression? And again, I'm not talking about necessarily due to an event, but something that goes back to our childhoods, just like there are children born autistic or other genetic, whatever you want to call it, mutations. And it's a very big question, not just from a practical point of view. From a mystical point of view, it's a very powerful question. Why? Because from the mystics wonder, is the soul autistic or is it the body? Or is it the channel between the soul and the body? In other words, are some souls come down to earth wounded? Are some souls deficient? And that's a theological quandary to say that. Because the soul is meant to be a part of the divine. So you're touching now God himself. And if the soul is so-called perfect, or healthy, or balanced, so what happened? Why some children have these diseases that limit their capacity to express themselves, and sometimes true handicaps that are not just easy to overcome, really change the whole destiny of a person's life. So you have discussions about this, especially in some of the mystical texts that talk about reincarnation and Gilgulim. souls as they travel. We don't always know the destiny and mystery of a soul's journey. But one thing is unequivocally clear, is that, as the Bible puts it right in the beginning of Genesis, that every person is created in the divine image. And as such, each of us has a innate, pure soul that's as divine as it gets. And there's no such thing as one person being more divine than the next. It's really the basis of the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. From a Torah point of view, it should have really said all people, not men, but I guess men can mean in the general term like man, human race. So based on that biblical statement, this is true about everyone. It doesn't matter what you see. Whether the child has Down syndrome, God forbid, or autism, or other non-mentionable diseases, the soul of the child is a divine entity. What happens is, and this is where we don't understand perfectly the reasons, what happens is that the channels between that inner dimension of the soul and the outer levels of existence may be severed or may be distorted. As I mentioned before, even the healthiest person has that problem. But in a case like that, there it's not the fault of the person, obviously. It's part of the mysteries of existence. So I'm not here to discuss, it's not the theme of this evening, the mysteries of existence, why certain children are born a certain way, why certain families have to suffer a certain way. I'm not here to justify it, I'm not here even to discuss it. But it's inevitably have to touch upon when you're discussing this whole issue of how a soul interacts with this world. Now, why is this so vital? Because really, this is our salvation. If one does not accept that the soul within each of us has that type of quintessential purity, then frankly, what hope can anyone give anybody for anything? You could say, hey, too bad. You had some negative experiences. Life serves survival of the fittest. Some have a better set of cards, others a worse set of cards. This is completely antithetical to Torah thinking, which does not believe in fatalism at all. It believes in the concept of a spirit that is unwavering, what's the word? Fatigable? Yeah. I can't even say it with my cough. Indefatigable, okay. Tongue twister. Meaning a reservoir of power that we can never even imagine how much energy it contains. And when you know that, and you believe in it, not only yourself and others, you can bring the best out of people. And if you don't believe in it, you'll never bring the best out of people, because if you really feel that person is damaged goods, or whatever it is, how are you going to lift them up to a greater place? The greatest masters, like Moses, and many in the same vein, were those that never refused to accept any type of no for an answer of the potential what a soul can accomplish. No matter what happened, and no matter what sins were transgressed, no matter what damage was done, the way the Kabbalists put it is the damage is done to the channels, never to the soul itself. So think of it of a well, or reservoir of power. And yes, the channels can be obstructed, but the reservoir itself is never affected. But this requires even more discussion, because the reservoir itself has layers. There's 5 names of the soul. There's 5 dimensions to the soul. But one thing is for sure, that when you get to the core of the soul, that is not affected. The challenge is, of course, how do you access it now? What happens if all the arteries have been so-called severed? So we know, for instance, God forbid, in a stroke victims, you find that the brain in its own way can reroute even nervous systems. It can be rewired. This, in a minimal example, is an example of what's possible on the spiritual level. You can create new channels. You can reroute channels. This, of course, requires training. This is the process of how one person truly heals. But it's not just healing and damage control. It's truly re-accessing that reservoir. What's even more fascinating is the statement that b'mokim shabal tshuva imdim tzadikim gemurim einim yechelim lamed sham. It means, anyone know what I just said? Okay. So one scholar. So it means that in the space, in the place where a Baal Tshuva, a person who, let's put it this way, lived one lifestyle, and they came to recognize truth through darkness, they can reach a level, they're at a level that a tzaddik, someone born into the light, can never achieve. But the expression sometimes is not only can never achieve, can never even potentially achieve. Which means that sometimes suffering or loss opens up a channel to a dimension into the soul that a person who so-called lived in health their entire lives will never access. They just can't access it. I don't know if that's a consolation. Many of us I would say all of us should prefer just having it the simpler way. But recently I was talking to someone, a brilliant person I know, suffered terribly. And she asked me, she used to come to the classes, she said to me, is it possible that if I had not suffered so much, I'd be very mediocre? She had to learn to excel in many ways as a result of her losses. So I said, who knows, but it's an interesting thought that some people achieve excellence only because they kind of compensate. But regardless, the point being is that the soul has enormous power, and it's only the people around your life that believe in you. And of course, it also helps not just they believe in you, but they also have some type of method that will help you get to a greater place. Someone doesn't believe in you and doesn't have those tools, then unfortunately we usually will succumb and become victims of our own nightmares. Which is why what they call in psychology the cognitive life raft, that even if emotionally a person feels despair. So one of the methods used in Torah thinking is the idea that at least with your mind travel to a place you'd like to be, even if you don't feel like you could go there. In other words, emotionally you may be afraid to go there or you just don't even want to try. But just take an imaginary journey with your mind to places that you aspire to. So though initially you could say it's just a fantasy, but since the soul within, for its potential, it's not a fantasy, that cognitive life raft, so to speak, can take you, and by imagining it, can trigger something in the soul that can then slowly seep into your system and ultimately even affect your fearful emotions. Everyone understood what I just said? Do I need to elaborate more on that? Now, so when it comes, let's say, I'm going to elaborate with Purim. So it comes a day like Purim. Talk about joy, and there's partying. And you could say it's a great day of escapism for many. Forget about what happened yesterday, tomorrow, Purim, we'll celebrate. Like any party. Then, of course, as the hours wear on, you start dreading the moment when the day is going to end. If the Cinderella, the chariot will turn back into a pumpkin, and all the other metamorphoses will return back to the regular. That's why we have to see Purim in a different light, and that is that Purim is a method. It's not just about joy as escapism. It's not even just about joy, because thousands of years ago the Jews were saved from Haman's edict. It's because Purim has the power to access a part of our dimension in our soul that no other day in the year has that power. And by celebrating, we access it. One of the great mystics said that people say, I can't be happy, I can't be joyous because I'm not happy. So the response is, maybe if you were happy, you'd be joyous. Meaning, it's a catch-22 situation. If one truly believes that the soul has inner joy, even though you don't feel it, and you act like it, you hang around with people that are upbeat, it has a power to open up that channel. This is common practice for any athlete, anyone that's trained. You don't always feel like it. thing called automatic pilot. You have to do it. You do it a few times enough, then suddenly it emerges. You'll see this many, many times. Like you see, even sports. They'll say the superstar is not really at his top of his game. And then suddenly, in the middle of the game, you'll see things change. What happened? Was the guy in a bad? It was a bad day. Should have been bad all the way. Because someone who's truly trained knows you got to go through certain motions, and then new strengths suddenly emerge. And maybe it's the competition, and maybe it's the adrenaline, whatever it may be. People who know themselves well use their mind. They don't let, even if they're in a slump, they don't let the worst thing of a slump is that you lose your confidence. Once you lose your confidence, it becomes a vicious cycle. So it all comes down to that you truly know within yourself that you can do it. And just because it's not working right now, doesn't mean it's not going to work. I remember the first time. I used to give this class, I gave this class for many years, but the first time they asked me to speak in public, and this is also public, but I guess it was an official lecture, I didn't want to do it. It wasn't because I had the butterflies or because I was shy, even though I am shy, despite appearances, was because I felt more comfortable in an informal setting, sitting, talking, a more intimate setting. A lecture was too fabricated for me. And I've since confirmed that. If you'll ever notice, the greatest lecturer in the world can be delivering a lecture, and there are children in the room, they're always ignoring it. So you think, with such a good lecture, why come it doesn't get the children's attention? So the arrogance of a lecturer will say, because the children are too stupid, they don't appreciate me, etc. I would say that children are very sensitive to truth. And lectures are fabricated situations. They're not truthful situations. The lecture may be a truthful statement, but the concept of a lecture is not, a child knows about a mother nurturing and holding the child and speaking with love. This thing of putting up a lecture in the middle of a room and getting up and lecturing people is not necessarily the human natural way of communicating. Not that it doesn't work, and I'm not here to say we should abolish the whole lecture circuit and so on. But I think children just do not recognize the setting. It's not natural to humans. Like you see in the natural world, you don't see any one of the animal kingdom that gets up and gives a lecture to all the other animals. I understand they don't speak, but they do communicate. But it's all collective. It's always like a group. Anyway, it's my little weird theory. Excuse me, please. So when you talk about Purim and the joy of Purim, I was using myself as an example. So the first time I got up, I didn't want to do it, I remember. And then it became, should I prepare myself? Should I not prepare? It was this whole thing. And I decided, you know what? I'll prepare something. I prepared, and I did not like at all what I said. So after 3 minutes into my lecture, I said, okay, listen, I was not born a lecturer. And I had something prepared, but I'm just going to throw away the script. I'll just speak to you from my heart. And since then I learned that I have to trust my own judgment. And it doesn't always work. Sometimes I get up. And not to say that I don't prepare. I mean, like someone said to me, how long did it take you to write your book? I said, well, 20 years and another 3 months. When you spend your whole life doing something, it's also part of the preparation. So then when it takes 3 months, it's not 3 months. It's the whole collective experience. So often, the situation is such, someone asks me to speak spontaneously, and sometimes I have no clue what I'm going to say. You pick up the vibe, but I have the confidence. And I don't say it with any arrogance. It's confidence that you build, and that sometimes you go into and you start hearing yourself that you don't like what you're saying. You just go on because you got no choice, and then you get into your groove. That's how it works. My point being is that we all have this potential. What you need to do is learn about what your soul is like. You build that confidence, then the method of accessing it and building those channels becomes tremendously easier. So true Purim, you can say, okay, most of us, we don't know, and no one has a clue why we celebrate on Purim. I'm talking about psychologically celebrate. Yeah, we understand we celebrate because, as I said, the Jews were saved from Haman. What does it mean today in the 21st century, 2009 that we're at? Okay. How time flies, yeah. It was just 1990. We don't have an idea, but here's the answer, and this is the method. The Purim story, interestingly, is the only book in the entire Torah that doesn't have God's name in it, as was one of the questions in the quiz last night. Now, why not? Every book has God's name in it. The answer is because in this Purim story, God's hand is concealed. If you just read the story, it almost seems like random circumstances. It's only when you add them all together, you connect the dots, you see there was a higher destiny taking place. What is the lesson to us? Is that there are times when miracles happen, fine. But most of the time they don't happen. Even then, there are miracles happening, but they're concealed. That if you look at, as I said yesterday, when you look at what Kierkegaard said, we can only understand our life backwards, but we must live our life frontwards. So think of it as a film that's unfolding. You don't know what the next frame will bring. It can be a complete surprise. But when you look backwards, you'll see all the frames led up to something. They're all part of one journey. That recognition, that humility, to realize that you don't write the script of your life, that you do not, with all your plans, you always have to reserve the knowledge that there may be another hand at work. That doesn't mean we don't plan, it doesn't mean we don't try, it doesn't mean we don't, but it means that there's also, after everything's said and done, there's something more that meets the eye. The inner dimensions, as I was referring to. That's the Purim story. A person that can sincerely and feel that way will find joy. Because where does anxiety come from? Anxiety comes from when you're convinced that you have your script all figured out and it doesn't look good. So you're so sure of yourself. That's ultimately where anxiety comes from. I'm not saying anxiety is not justified. It could be a situation that's extremely overwhelming, and objectively even is one that can cause anyone to become anxious. But it doesn't take into account forces that you cannot see. And if you're unable to acknowledge that, then you've basically written your script. You're saying what I see is what it is, and based on that, I only have one conclusion: despair. However, if a person understands, and maybe begins first in the mind, as I said, a cognitive life raft. First you have to understand it with your mind. Is there a script of life that's anyone predicted? Can you show me one person that at the end of their life said, yeah, I predicted everything exactly as it would work? Impossible. The difference between the happier people and not are the ones that didn't mind that they didn't write their script. They didn't have a problem with it. They surrendered in the first place, in a good way. They understood, I will do my best. But then there are forces that will not work, and then you just have to ride with it. It's essentially the acknowledgement of a higher force in your life that's concealed. That's why God's name is not mentioned. And that's why there's joy, Purim. Because joy comes from a recognition that there's something always happening that you don't see. Now, obviously, in Judaism in general, we bless each other, that everything should be revealed and our blessing should be revealed. We shouldn't have to rely on these hidden scripts. But the fact is, we live in a world where there are many dimensions. It's interesting, in mysticism they teach us that the world was once a non-dichotomous place, which meant that there was a seamlessness between the inner spirituality of existence and the outer reality. But then human beings, through their errors and through their mistakes, severed that connection. So though those layers are still there, but now it's not a seamless flow. So think of it this way. If life is like a machine, so a machine has a certain built-in hardware and software that the engineer constructed it with. And if you use the machine according to the engineer's instructions, the machine will hum along and follow the way what was meant to be. But let's say somebody decides to start tampering with the machine, using it in ways that were not meant to be, doing things that were not supposed to, this machine wasn't supposed to do. What's going to happen? The machine will ultimately break down. So the way the mystics put it is that the universe is a big machine. And there are guidelines that make this machine work, and there are guidelines that make the machine not work. This includes also each of us, like a small universe. So a mitzvah and the antithesis of a mitzvah is not just a good deed or an obligation to God. Above all, it's an obligation to yourself. Mitzvah comes from the word connection. It's really a connection to yourself. Have you betrayed your soul or have you not? Health is the seamless flow of a soul with all the channels open into the body. Only we human beings can reverse that process by behaving in ways that are destructive to that flow. So, for instance, a person behaves selfishly. And we all have selfish tendencies. We all first think about ourselves. But let's say you act on it. And you hurt someone in the process. It's happened, right? More than we'd like. Would you agree? It happens once in a while on earth? That people hurt each other? Nobody agrees with that? Okay. Very idealistic group. So, people hurt each other. In the beginning, there may always be good intentions even. But basically, you've allowed your selfishness to take over. This is not just destructive to other people, it's destructive to you. It's not how a soul functions in this universe. A soul was created to give. This material universe teaches us to take. Here you got the first battle. We've become takers when we should be givers. And many people say, what do you mean? If I'm not going to take, who's going to give me? So in other words, begins this cycle. It was, what was it? Who was the guy that acted in the Frisco Kid? Gene Wilder? So he's acting this Hasidic Jew, travels to San Francisco. So there's this train robbery in the middle of the movie where the train robber gets on the train, he rips everybody's jewelry off, their money, their wallets, whatever, all their belongings, valuable belongings. Just before he jumps off the train, he says, remember, it's always better to give than to take. So he took it all and left them with that message. So we live in a world of many takers, which train us to be takers as well. And it's a dog eats dog. If you need examples of it, look around our economy in the last few months and the reactions to it. The Torah's model is one that is driven by giving, not by taking. And that when you give, you'll get what you need. And the fact that there are other people trying to steal your thing still shouldn't turn you into a taker. Just because everyone else is insecure doesn't mean you should be insecure, basically. And that's why, however, this is the road less traveled, because this requires very serious spiritual fortitude. You have to have unbelievable confidence, strength to be a giver, especially in a world where there's so many takers. I'm not suggesting that you marry someone that's just a taker and you just be a giver. That's another imbalance. But I've learned from my own work, for instance, sometimes you have to know you give. You have to know where a person, you don't want to be the babysitter. A person has to know how to reach as well. Or else you're not training a person to really become an adult. The challenge is to know what the balance should be like. But it's no different when healthy parents are teaching their child to walk and the child takes the first step. So compassion then would say, I don't want my child to fall. I'm not going to let the child take the first step because he may fall. Or she is not compassion at all. It's your own selfish issue. So what you have to do is show the child, I'm here. I'm here for you. Sometimes the child doesn't even know you're there, but you're watching. And let the child develop the confidence to take the few steps and fall and pick himself up and walk again and so on. The unhealthy balance would be when you're either too controlling or too absent. But this is the process of what's called nurturing. Nurturing doesn't just mean you're a caretaker and you help everybody at all times. That's not what giving means. That type of giving could also be selfish. You like to give. Giving also means is the person who's receiving being made stronger and healthier, is it? Or you're just getting off on the fact that you have so much to give. So it's a more complicated thing than just, but it's definitely moving people from taking to giving. And understanding the Purim story, which is, of course, the mitzvahs of Purim are about giving. Matanas Lavyanim, gifts to the poor, Shleach Manas, the food packages we sent to each other, and in general, a generous spirit of love, of spirit of celebration together. So it's not disconnected from the whole story. It's all connected to the idea that we don't know the full script. It's not all about me. There's a bigger story unfolding. There's another hand, an invisible hand, which helps us access a joy that's locked inside of you, even though you may not know. And it creates and it's accessed through the process of giving, of sharing. Try it out. Try to do something unconditionally for another person, a giving act, and specifically not because you're getting something for it. You tell me what it makes you feel like. So in the beginning, some people feel like I'm being used and so on, but I'm telling you something of your choice. What it turns you into is building a confidence that you have what to give. A taker, no matter how much he hoards or she hoards, ultimately he's also living with another reality, that my value is only as much as I can take. Do you have the power to give? Do you have anything to give, for that matter? And not what you, the gift of gab, what you can sell to somebody. I'm talking about really inside of you. Now, this is not an easy discussion. You talk to one-on-one with people. It's not easy to tell someone who's a full taker, a parasite, that, listen, you have the courage to give. Because they're usually in denial. They usually think that they're giving, or they convince themselves, or everybody is worse takers than me, that type of thing. So, in the story of joy, which really is the story of our soul, it's about recognizing two things: that it's within you, and the second thing is that there are methods to access it. So yes, so as we go to, we move from an inspiring moment, whatever it may be. Maybe some of you weren't even inspired Purim either. That's fine. But there'll be moments when you may be. The challenge is, how do you connect the two worlds? And actually it can be a very exhilarating challenge, because in a sense what you're doing is putting things right again. You're fixing, repairing. Tikkun olam, they call it. There's something we all like about fixing something. Children like it, but even adults. Something breaks and you're able to put it back together again. A very basic level. Why? Because there's something that resonates when things are complete, whole. So we live in a broken world. That's absolutely true. But we also live in a world where we're given the power to fix. And that power really means accessing that inner dimension that is never touched by the break, and then channeling it into the outer world. So yeah, many, many people told me over the years how doom and gloom, that their lives will never work. And if you look at the script, the way they put it, it sounds pretty airtight, but with a little caveat, that's the way they put it, the way they see it. That's the whole point, that there's another way to see it. They say in Yiddish, Gott, Mensch tracht, Gott lacht, which means right, but there's a way to say it in English that rhymes as well. Plans and laughs doesn't rhyme. But man conceives and God, whatever, retrieves? No. There must be a word. Anyway, the point being is that it requires a humility, it requires a connection to something that's greater than ourselves. Can I say, if a person doesn't have that, is there any hope altogether? It always amazed me that the first of the 12-step program was always that I recognize I'm not in control of my own life, and that I have to surrender or accept a higher voice, a higher authority. It's the first of the 10 Commandments. Anecha Hashem Elokecha. It was written long before the 12 steps were. The original 10 steps. It's understanding, it's not about the religious God that so many people distort it with. It's about understanding that it's not just about you. His life is not just about you. You're an integral part. You're indispensable. You have the divine force image working through you. But that should teach you that it's about a bigger picture. Because if you understand your own divine voice, you respect other divine voices. And in that sense, each of us has something to contribute that is indispensable. That belief, in that few sentences that I just stated, is the key to real joy. That's why when the mystics say, if you were joyous, you'd be happy. When the person says, well, I'm not joyous because I'm not happy. In other words, if you behaved, even if you had to fake it, but faking it only, as I said before, like automatic pilot, simply to access a part of yourself that you may not access unless you try it, is the key. So, as we stand here, as I said, Purim winding down here in Jerusalem, everywhere, and we actually prepare ourselves now 30 days before Passover. So Jews always have a holiday up their sleeve. It's not Purim, it's Passover. And we'll talk about that in the coming weeks. There are, and for me this is the key, there are profound psychological lessons in all of these calendar cycles. And that really is the challenge in our time. You can go to other classes if you want to learn about how to find chametz in your house or how to bake a matzah. I'm not dismissing that. It has value. But that is the mechanics. The key thing that I think for all of us is, what is its personal relevance? How can these traditions and these customs and these stories help us develop the methodology we need to empower us to access those reservoirs and channel it into our daily lives? That's the bottom line challenge. I speak for myself, but something that I think everyone can learn as an example. Now, many years ago, I committed to what I do now. I never turned back. I never looked back. And it's a commitment to teach and to write and to use my skills, because I realized that many of the treasures of Torah wisdom and mystical teachings were so powerful and yet so unknown. So I saw there too a channel that was severed. These deep secrets that sometime in history people knew. I guess it was just there. And then life, with all the challenges and history and I guess the persecutions and even modernity, prosperity, in a way concealed all of that. So to me it was like inconceivable for me not to get involved in such a mission. Imagine you were shown a treasure that can help everybody on this earth. And you have a skill, some way to communicate. Not you're going to save the world yourself. To go do something else, for me, was inconceivable. It became very clear what my personal mission was. And thank God, completely building it from scratch and and the passion and commitment, and having examples and role models of others that fought the battles. So we sit here today, and I say this I'm not saying this to toot my horn, not even a commercial break for the Meaningful Life Center. It's really a message that I think every one of us can learn from. You all have your dreams, but you have to pay a price. And the price is commitment. It has to be a commitment that's unwavering. It has to be something you believe in. But once you do, you cannot stop just because it's not comfortable or because some other challenges came your way. So to make things easier, I invite you, since I already paid some prices and it was difficult to build something from scratch. One of my passions is to turn this place into a true hub, like an incubator of kindred spirits like ourselves. Because I know that as much as I have to give, you all have to give. Honestly, I think that if you're allowed the environment that's trusting, warm, empowering, loving, unbelievable stuff comes out of people. And imagine if a few people can join together in that way, then what can they create? That's what I believe in. I don't even know what it will be. I mean, I have a general sense it should be something of generating some powerful energy. But whether it's going to turn into a film or piece of music or something that will just help some people individually or something educational, the sky's the limit. So I don't have any limit. Those are already methods. The key is the objective, and the objective is to allow people to feel they're in an environment that allows... What is an incubator after all? It's a warm environment where eggs are hatched. That's where the word comes from. So we all have our eggs that need to be hatched, which means our potential that needs to emerge. So tell me, is that not a worthwhile mission? Because that ultimately is the destiny of our lives. Everything else we do may be the means, it may be even important things we do, but often they are means, meaning they can also be a distraction if you don't have your core mission, your objective, the destination you want to reach. So please see me as an ally in this journey. And our goal is to find not a static destination, to find the common destiny, but also a personal one. That each of you, there's no question, has a mission why your soul was sent down to this earth. And this mission is embedded somewhere in your psyche, probably pretty trapped, and is waiting to be released. So together, it makes it a lot easier to do. So those of you who were here yesterday, I want to thank you because you helped me, and I know you helped many others release some of that energy. But as I said, the challenge is to sustain it. So I'm happy to have a class the next night, even though it's not ready. The Purim so-called high is dissipating. And if we can turn this into a 24/7 thing every day and just keep the energy flowing, that would be great. I want to also especially thank some of the musical entertainers that were here. I know entertaining is not the right word. It was more from the heart and the soul. So I will say this, that please expect a lot of music to be played in this room here. And I don't just mean physical music. I mean also spiritual music, personal music. And I welcome you all to participate in any way you see fit. And in any way you don't see fit, at your own pace. Let's put it that way. So I apologize again. It's not my control. My channels that are blocked here this evening. I just didn't want to cancel the class. I never canceled this class. I'm feeling all right, so don't worry. I hope I was cohesive. I might have put coherent. That's the word I wanted. And if I wasn't, I'm sure the camera will record it for posterity. But if I wasn't, so you think of it more like an Adalaya, the Purim hangover. Okay, so what we're planning next, by the way, as far as the party goes, is probably going to be Lag BaOmer, which is in May. I'm not sure what day it is. So stay tuned. And some of you asked me about Passover. Not sure yet. I probably will do Passover Seder in my home, but I definitely, if anybody wants to have a meaningful Seder and have nowhere to go, well, let's not put it this way. Even if you have where to go, I could offer something as well. Be a guest by me in our home. So let me know if anyone is interested in taking me up on that. I also want to repeat, even though I know some of you approached us, we are definitely, we're still in the process of finishing the final design of this place, even though it's getting better and better. But outside and signs and a few other things, and then we'll make a grand opening. And meanwhile, we have begun classes here, one-on-one or small groups if you have particular interests. So if you are, I think I've run out of time. But let me get one more sentence out. If you are interested in any type of one-on-one study or small group study, talk to Golda Malka right here. Wave. Golda Malka means in Hebrew is a translation for Golden Queen. So she's got a good name. The Golden Queen. And we will send you like maybe a short questionnaire. They'll just to help crystallize your interests, whether you want to learn mysticism or history or Chumash or text, etc., etc. And as I said, we shall turn this place into maybe the hottest spot in New York. So, l'chaim to everyone. It's an honor to speak to you. May you have only joy in your lives, also on the outer levels, not just on the inner. And I see you again next Wednesday. I shall be here. What do we have coming next Tuesday? Oh, that's not. If you don't, again, emails, we also send out the schedule that's coming up. We also have calendars here for the next month. And stay tuned. Thank God things are going even better than expected. And it'll only get better and better. Good night.